Well, I've been joined here in the studio by Peter Saunders. He's the Chief Executive and founder of the National Association of People Abused in Childhood, and Fiona O'Reilly of Catholic Voices, a group which gives a Catholic perspective in the media. Fiona, Pope Francis's words today, do they go further than any other comment made by any previous pope about child sexual abuse by Catholic priests?
I think they build on the foundation that, in particular, Pope Benedict laid. Benedict recognised that these are awful crimes for which there can be no excuse. I think what's particularly encouraging with Pope Francis is that he's mentioning the need for sanctions, the need to take no step backwards but to push forwards. No one is saying no one is saying enough has been done. There's a huge amount more still to be done, but this is a Pope who gets it.
Peter, Pope who gets it.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Fiona, actually. The Pope has mentioned sanctions, and we wait to see what he means by sanctions, but I think that is quite significant. And he talks about not going backwards, and I think, again, that is extremely significant, because there are millions, well, I would argue almost millions of survivors of abuse around the world, and many hundreds of thousands of those have been abused at the hands of clergy of various denominations, not just Catholic. But I do think that Pope Francis is a man who appears to get it, and let's hope that the rhetoric turns into action. But I am hopeful.
You're hopeful, but it's a watch and wait, and some victim organisations of child sexual abuse by Catholic priests say, look, we need to know what these sanctions are. And basically what they say is, unless abusing, or priests accused of abusing children are handed over to civil criminal authorities in whatever country, that is what they want. And there's no suggestion, is there, that that's the kind of sanction that the Pope is talking about?
Well, let's be clear that that's already in place, because under Pope Benedict XVI, he made it very clear to all of the local churches that they were compelled to comply with the local civil law and criminal law. So in this country, a bishop who hid an abuser would be guilty of a criminal offence. Now, the slight challenge for the Catholic Church with 1.2 billion people around the world is, in some countries, child abuse, disgracefully, is not actually an offence. So there, what the Pope Benedict did, and what Pope Francis is now building upon, is he instructed the local bishops' conferences to also put in place policies and procedures to safeguard, to bring to justice, and also to promote the healing of the victims, which is just as important.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say that's the reason I'm here, is that I was also a victim of abuse by priests as a child, as I say, as were many others, and my concern is support for the victims, and I think that there is a great deal more that the Church can do. And it has a history of cover-ups, like many institutions. We're here at the BBC, which has still many questions to answer over the Jimmy Savile scandal, etc.
So your emphasis is on going forward and not just
going forward, but also acknowledging the very
system.
great pain carried by so many survivors who have had very bad. I mean, I've had generally good experiences in my interactions with the Church and with the charity that I work for, but there are many survivors out there who have had doors closed in their face, and I hope that Pope Francis is going to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future.
So acknowledgement of what's happened and prevention and protection is really the emphasis.
We have good child protection, you know, the Catholic child protection policies in this country are excellent. Nobody would criticise them. It's care for victims from the past that is, you know, for us is the acid test. And as Fiona said, other parts of the world, other dioceses have dealt with things, and there are over 1 billion Catholics around the world, the vast majority of whom will be completely supportive of what Pope Francis is saying, because they, more than anybody, have been disgusted by some of the revelations that have come out in recent years.
Fiona, you said, or you implied, that the fault isn't exactly with the Vatican, but in countries where there isn't a robust enough judicial legal system to deal with child sexual abuse. But you know, there was that report a couple of months ago by the United Nations Human Rights Committee, which was damning of the Vatican and saying that even still today it is more concerned about protecting its own reputation rather than protecting children, and that you still have cases of abusing clerics who are just simply moved around from one diocese to another.
And I think that there are parts of the world where that is a problem that still needs to be fully tackled. The real missed opportunity, frankly, with that UN report was that it ignored the good work that had been done and which could so easily have formed a foundation to partner with the Vatican in moving forward, and made it far easier for people who wanted to dismiss it, just to dismiss it on the basis of factual inaccuracies. But to come back to an earlier point, you asked me how different was this Pope's approach, and I think one of the things that, implicit in the UN comments was, well, the Church needs to really respond, and part of that response has got to be informed by what is helpful for victims, and what is hugely encouraging is that the Pontifical Commission, which this Pope set up fairly recently, doesn't just have cardinals like Sean O'Malley from Boston, who's got a reputation for sorting this stuff out, but it also brings on people like Maria Collins from Ireland, herself a survivor of sexual abuse, who was treated disgracefully by the Church and who is in a very good position to effectively help the Church really move forward on this in a completely new way, a way I think that will surprise all of us.
I would like to have seen a few more survivors of abuse invited
on
onto
that commission that the Vatican set up.
Yes,
I mean, that was one
a little bit like many of
yes.
us that have been working with survivors for many years, both to do with clerical abuse and everything. APAC is for survivors of all forms of abuse. We were very disappointed that we weren't able to meet the Pope when he came over last time.
Very quickly, you said earlier on you're hopeful that those sanctions will be robust enough. Just very quickly, what kind of sanctions do you think Pope Francis should be talking about?
Well, I hope he looks very carefully at the United Nations papers that came out and the criticisms, and I hope that he actively encourages his bishops around the world where they do have information about priests who are a danger to children to work closely with the civil authorities to protect our children, and if that means handing them over, giving information to the police, whatever. That's what I think. That's what I hope he means by sanctions. Peter Saunders from the National Association of People Abusing Childhood and Fiona O'Reilly of Catholic Voices. Thank you both very much indeed.